2021 was another great year for film, and while I wasn't able to catch all the big ticket movies from this year, especially foreign movies like Drive My Car and The Worst Person in the World, I still saw many films that left a big impact on me, and I figured it was time to compile them into my personal top 10. And before we launch into the honorable mentions segment, I want to reiterate that this list is just my opinion, and it will exist in a state of flux until I can see some of the other films from this year that I missed, such as Spencer and Red Rocket. Also, I have specific videos focusing deeply on many of the films on this list, so if you want to hear my detailed thoughts on them, I'll leave some cards in the top right-hand corner, but all the links to these videos will be put in the description and can be found by doing a quick swipe through my library of content. But without further ado, I want to get into the honorable mentions. I have 4 of them, and I'm going to split them up into 2 halves. The popcorny fun time at the movies, and the more profound, emotionally resonant movies. The 2 movies that I had a fun time watching this year that just missed the top 10 cut were Zola and Last Night in Soho. One of these films is about a pair of strippers who embark upon a dizzying neon-drenched odyssey in a seedy part of Florida, and the other is about a London fashion student who encounters a realm of horror when she's lured into a 1960s dream world. So, these 2 films don't share a lot in common in terms of their subject matter, but some traits both of these films do share besides the pure enjoyability factor is solid direction, fantastic performances, and slick stylistic camera work, as well as a unique stylized surrealness. If I'm being honest and had to choose one of these 2 films over the other, I would pick Zola, personally. Last Night in Soho was a bold and ambitious effort from Edgar Wright, and while I deeply respect the risks he took, a good portion of the movie came up short for me, specifically the series of cliches he falls back on, and the lackluster horror elements. Zola, on the other hand, was a much more stripped-down film by comparison. It balanced humor and tension really well, and in my opinion worked better overall as it kept me enthralled the whole time. I give Zola the edge on Soho in terms of rewatchability. Now on the other side of the honorable mentions coin are 2 films that explore grief and the continuous trauma that follows in a very emotionally intelligent way. Those 2 films are Michael Sarnowski's Pig and Fran Kans's Mass. One way in which these films are similar is that the experience of watching them is amplified by going into the movie with a lack of knowledge in regards to the plot. This is especially true with Mass. If you haven't seen Mass or heard about it, all I'll say is that the film takes place in a confined room and the characters come from opposite sides of an unthinkably traumatic event and are left to hash it out between themselves for 2 hours, basically. In terms of its structure, Mass is very play-like, and from a story perspective, it might even work better on the stage than it does on film. But on film, however, it shows off the potential for low-budget filmmaking while cultivating an environment for the crafts of acting and dialogue writing to take center stage. The film also propels director Fran Kans, who I only knew previously as the actor who played the stoner dude in Cabin in the Woods, to the status of director to watch out for in the future. With Pig, on the other hand, my initial viewing was enhanced by some of the misleading marketing done for the release. Going in blind would be your best bet if you haven't seen it, but I think at this point the cat is pretty much out of the bag. The film leads you to believe that it's a tweaked out Nick Cage action, revenge, John Wick kind of movie, but that's very much not the case. Pig is a very quiet, methodical, and finely crafted drama. Director Michael Sarnowski brilliantly subverted the expectations for a Nicolas Cage film and used Cage's acting skills for good. I don't think I'd be alone in saying that Pig is one of Cage's best performances. While we're on the subject of performances, before we march on into the top 10, I want to take a moment to acknowledge some of the standout performances from the 4 honorable mentions, specifically Taylor Page and Coleman Domingo in Zola, Thomasin McKenzie in Soho, Nick Cage in Pig, and all four of the main actors in Mass. Coming in at number 10 on my list of the top 10 films of 2021 is one that will surprise some, but one that most people probably haven't seen yet, and that is Censor, a period piece horror film directed by Prano Bailey Bond. The period Censor takes us back into is Margaret Thatcher's UK, sometime in the 1980s. Our protagonist, Enid, is a professional film censor who is tasked with snipping out the goriest and bloodiest bits from the most depraved and nefarious films the British film industry had to offer. Underground films that were known as video nasties. Bailey Bond really nails the nostalgia factor that would draw many to this film, while also paying homage to its giallo and video nasty influences. Going under the surface, the film's period setting wasn't an accident or arbitrary, but rather it was instrumental to the themes at large, specifically the fallibility of moral panics and outrages. The kind of societal scapegoating and finger-pointing that inevitably happens when censorship arises is painted as a sort of collective repression of the darker side of humanity, and when the safe outlets for our darker sides are severed, the consequences leak out, and those impulses can be exercised in very dark and harmful ways. As the fictitious video nasty director says in the film, people think I create the horror, but I don't. Horror is already out there in all of us. It's in you. All of the influences for his depraved cinematic exercises came from real life. Censor is an effective horror film because it abstracts the source of terror. It makes it shapeless and hard to pin down. And the scariest part is that its potential exists deep down in all of us, invisibly like a strand of DNA. There is no need to outsource terror to CGI ghosts or universal monsters of old, when true terror walks among us on the streets every day and lives in a deep, dark crevice within our souls. At number 9 on my list is a film that might have been included on more top 10 lists if only those darn kids could stay off their phones long enough. That movie is Ridley Scott's The Last Duel. Ridley Scott needs no introduction. He's a legend, and so understandably I was pretty excited to learn that he was releasing 2 movies in the same year. Out of the 2, I saw House of Gucci first, and suffice it to say I was disappointed. It lowered my expectations enough to boost my appreciation for The Last Duel when I was finally able to see it. Scott's film has a lot of the themes one would expect from a medieval period piece. Themes like honor, valor, revenge. While those themes and associated tropes are about as old as the setting, Scott freshens up The Last Duel with a Rashomon flair. In the film, a certain event unfolds, an event that summons up the need for revenge to be had, and the audience gets to see the events through the perspectives of each of the 3 principal characters. This keeps us engaged with the characters and the excellent performances within, but in my opinion, it does get a bit stale around the 3rd time through the events. It adds some unnecessary bloat to the film that probably could get cut. Despite that, Ridley Scott is pretty transparent with what you're going to be getting out of The Last Duel, and if you think you'll enjoy that experience, you should definitely check it out. But if you know that that kind of movie isn't up your alley, you're probably correct. At number 8 on my list, we have a film that is generating a lot of awards buzz, and that is Jane Campion's Netflix film, The Power of the Dog. This is one of those films that I dedicated an entire video on, so if you're interested in hearing my 18-minute deep dive on this film, click on the card above. The Power of the Dog is a difficult film to watch. It's a challenging work. I had some trouble with it when it first came out. I watched it about to the halfway point and stopped. It's only when I returned to the film that I began to glean what made it worth the patience that one must must extend to watch this movie. Campion's pacing is methodical, it's patient, and at times painfully slow. But if you stick with it, The Power of the Dog truly rewards patience, and especially rewards repeat viewings. The true implications of even the smallest of gestures and the most inconsequential lines of dialogue come full circle and are easily missed en route to a terrific ending and final shot. Truthfully, for the first hour and a half, it's easy to get lost on the trail Campion is blazing. It seems like nothing is happening, and when in reality, Campion is cocking back her fist and luring you towards it, easing you along until she socks you in the gut. However well the film ends and however deep the characters, the pacing was still a bit of an issue for me personally and prevented it from climbing up the list. But regardless, The Power of the Dog is still very much worth watching for the awesome landscapes, the brilliant performances, and the masterful direction. At number 7 on the list, I have one of the major reasons why this video has been delayed by several weeks, and that is Joel Coen's rendition of The Tragedy of Macbeth. Because of the director, the cast, and the striking black and white cinematography, this was one of my most anticipated movies of the year. And with those sky-high expectations came a slight bit of disappointment when I finally saw the movie. Such is the curse of high expectations. It wasn't as if the movie wasn't good or that there was something wrong with it. The reality was very much the opposite, in fact. The direction was brilliant, and the performances actually exceeded their individual expectations. Perhaps the source of my slight disappointment stems from allowing myself to believe that maybe the confluence of Joel Coen, Denzel, Frances McDormand, and the rest of the cast could transcend the same story that I remember from high school and have seen on the big screen several times already. The story, however, remains the same, and hopefully always will. That speaks to the power of the truths embedded within the original play. All that we can hope for in terms of adaptations is that the medium of film and the bright minds that wield it can add something to a timeless tale. In my opinion, Joel Coen and his cast and crew do have something to add. The most apparent addition to the Scottish play is its stunning presentation and influence from German Expressionism. The black and white not only looks amazing, but injects an extra dose of gloominess and nefariousness to an already dark tale. It appeals to visual style while also accentuating the themes of corruption, murder, and an insatiable lust for power. Another question I had while watching the film was, why now? Why another adaptation of Macbeth, one with a heavy emphasis on its themes here and now? Perhaps Joel Coen is of the opinion that the themes and the timeless truths within this play were specifically relevant for our current climate, for our day and age. At number 6 on my list, I have another one of the most anticipated movies I had coming into this year, and that is Denis Villeneuve's Dune. It seems like it's been a long time since there was a big, non-Marvel blockbuster movie. Dune certainly filled that void. Dune was considered to be an unfilmable work for a very long time, and that reputation was only armored by the many well-known failures in adapting it. But if there was one director who I felt extremely confident in helming Frank Herbert's classic novel, it was Denis Villeneuve. And in learning from the mistakes of David Lynch's previous adaptation, he did a wise thing and decided to split the story into 2 parts, and potentially even 3. I can't blame Lynch totally for the failure of his Dune film, as there was a significant amount of studio intervention his work on Dune succumbed to. But it was heartening to see the studio put the trust in Denis to faithfully adapt Herbert's novel, and it seems like they're going to be benefiting very nicely from that decision financially. With that being said, I'm still in a conflicted state with Denis' choice to break the movie up into a potential trilogy. While I have no doubt that it was the correct move, it left 2021's Dune feeling a bit incomplete and a little bit hollow at the end. This year's Dune was ultimately bittersweet for me because the cinematic experience of Denis' film was astounding, but the ending left me severely starving for more. At number 5, the halfway point of my list, I have another one of my most anticipated movies coming into this year, and that is Paul Thomas Anderson's Licorice Pizza. Anderson is one of my favorite directors, period, and I make sure to see every new movie he comes out with as soon as possible. With Licorice Pizza, he sticks to his streak of 5 consecutive period pieces, and in comparison with his previous film, Phantom Thread, I thought Licorice Pizza was a lot more accessible and a lot more fun. Phantom Thread is a great movie, don't get me wrong, but it was much slower and to me felt like the constipated aristocrat of PTA's filmography. Licorice Pizza is much looser, and it has drawn some criticism for that. Many have noted how the film doesn't have a coherent narrative or story structure. This isn't an unfamiliar aspect to Anderson's work, though it does feel more pronounced in Licorice Pizza. PTA trusted his novice actors enough to make a movie so reliant on character. He thrusted them into a sink or swim kind of situation, and his decision paid off in dividends as both Cooper Hoffman and Alana Haim impressed, injecting a naturalistic energy that carries the film over its void of plotlessness. That void of plotlessness isn't the only front of criticism facing Anderson and Licorice Pizza. Many people took issue with the age gap separating Alana and Gary's characters in their relationship. I won't tell anyone what to think on that issue or really comment on it. I'll leave that to everyone's personal opinion. What I will say about the relationship is that it is a weird kind of yin and yang that mirrors Paul Thomas Anderson's attitude towards the nostalgia of his past. Alana and her wistful longing for the past represents a desire to return to simpler times, while Gary and his frenetic entrepreneurial spirit represents hope for the future, a hope that PTA expresses with him propelling forward the next generation of acting talent in Licorice Pizza. Number 4 on my list is Mike Mills' latest film, Come On, Come On. Come On, Come On shares similar cinematic DNA with Licorice Pizza in its emphasis on character at the expense of plot, and its introduction of young acting talent to the big screen. The promising talent in question is young Woody Norman, who in this film gives one of the best child actor performances in recent memory, and really one of the best I think I've ever seen. He matches Joaquin Phoenix beat for beat and even outshines the Oscar winner often, in my opinion. Some credit for Woody Norman's brilliant performance has to be siphoned over to Mills for crafting a great character in general. He made the character of Jesse whip smart and articulate. Mills respects the fact that children aren't dumb, but rather just lacking in experience and information. Themes of childhood are woven all throughout Mills's film. We see them most prominently in the documentary elements where Phoenix's Johnny quizzes children on their expectations for the future. These themes of childhood are constructed with Johnny's shy and melancholic sensibility. Throughout the film, we're shown how Johnny's childhood and upbringing have left an emotional residue on who he is in the film. We can even go as far as to say that his experiences chiseled him into who he is in the film, and we can start to see Woody Norman's Jesse treading down a similar path. At some point in their journey, we might expect Johnny to sit Jesse down and offer sage advice on how to avoid making the same mistakes he made, but Mills's film is far too emotionally intelligent to trip into a cliché sinkhole. Instead, Johnny attempts to install in his nephew the emotional infrastructure needed to survive moments of pain and trauma for when they inevitably happen. Cinema is at its best when it traffics and communicates in emotion and feeling, and Come On is a movie that makes you feel many different kinds of ways. The beautiful black and white cinematography certainly doesn't hurt its case. At number 3 on the list, we have the first foreign entry, and that is Julia Ducournau's Titane. The most recent Palme d'Or winner is the French director's second film after her debut Raw in 2017. Both of Ducournau's films share the trait of boldness. She's not afraid of taking cinematic risks that could isolate viewers. Rather, she's laser-focused on creating films true to her, and the results are creative, inventive, and emotionally nuanced. Titane might be one of the only films I've seen that successfully bridged the gap between being horrifyingly gruesome while also being touchingly wholesome. The first third of the film is brutal and gory, a proper modern-day video nasty. It was quickly nearing the threshold of being excessively so for me, and for many others I'm sure it safely crossed that boundary. At around the midpoint, the film transitions from being a kind of serial killer thriller to being more of a domestic drama, and remarkably, it does so without sacrificing any of the tension previously built up. If anything, you could say that Ducournau cranks the tension up en route to a thrilling climax. At the end of the film, we aren't asked to like our protagonist, and for the most part, we don't. But through the emotional juxtaposition with Vincent, our other principal character, we can begin to understand her. Titane is one of the most unique films I've seen in a long time, and one that I'm greatly looking forward to revisiting. At number 2 on my list is David Lowery's medieval fantasy epic, The Green Knight. The Green Knight is adapted from Arthurian lore, specifically the 14th century poem Sir Gawain and the Green Knight. But Lowery's film is a very unconventional type of adaptation. It pays homage nicely to its source material, but he tinkers with its DNA to make it more palatable and more relevant to a modern audience. Lowery uses the Gawain character and his self-centered impulses as a vehicle for the tale's renewed relevancy. Gawain desires nothing more than the respect and approval of his fellow Knights of the Round Table. He wants to be welcomed unquestionably within their ranks, but instead of leveraging his youth and energy towards becoming knightly, he squanders it on boozing up his knights in brothels. Gawain has to reassure himself that he has time. That time is on his side. When, on Christmas, his uncle King Arthur asks him to recount a tale from his life, he's horrified when he comes up stumped. He has no stories to tell, no accolades to boast of, no laurels to rest on. This stirs up a deep anxiety within Gawain, and thus, when the Green Knight materializes, he seizes upon an opportunity to earn some cheap and easy admiration. But of course, there's always a price to be paid for it, and Gawain's real journey comes in summoning up the courage to face his fate. Stylistically, The Green Knight stands out from the rest of the pack in a big way. In addition to its phenomenal cinematography, direction, and performances, it packs a profound emotional punch. With The Green Knight, Lowery digs deep into the vault of history to exhume long-buried knowledge with potential for utility in the present and in the future. For the sake of brevity, I won't elaborate any further, but if you're interested in hearing all of my thoughts on The Green Knight, I'll leave a card in the top right-hand corner here. And finally, the top entry, my personal pick for the best film of the year, is Paolo Sorrentino's The Hand of God. Sorrentino's latest work is a coming-of-age film, one based off of his youth growing up in Naples. Following the lead of Alfonso Cuarón with Roma and now Kenneth Branagh in Belfast, Sorrentino remakes the formative years for the silver screen, and we're given a peek into his family life, his love and admiration for Diego Maradona, and his personal tragedies. We see how these pivotal moments in the film made Sorrentino who he is today, and they even inform the stylistic and artistic choices we see so clearly in his work. The title of the film references a famous goal scored by his idol Maradona, but to me it also encapsulates what I view as the main theme of the film, and that theme is an overriding sense of destiny. Whether you want to attribute that omnipotent guiding hand to God or whom or whatever, Sorrentino's film left me feeling a sense of cosmic guidance, that even the worst of events play a role and may even be necessary towards ushering you along to the place you're meant to end up in. Sorrentino stated that almost everything that occurs in the movie actually happened in real life. The authenticity from the autobiographical elements of the film, along with its nuanced themes, resonated enough for me to declare it my pick for the best film of 2021.